Hi, everyone. Welcome to People Metrics Live. Today, we're sharing 3 strategies for turning your customers into promoters. Sean, before we dive into these 3 strategies, can we just do a quick refresher of what is a promoter exactly?
For sure. And for anybody interested in more detail on this, I wrote a book called Listen or Die, and Net Promoter Score is covered in 2 chapters. I think it's 5 and 6. If anybody wants like a really deep dive, but we're going to go over at a very high level kind of what this is right now. And then we'll get into like, how do we get more of these promoters? So Net Promoter Score, right? It's based on a question, something like this, thinking about your overall relationship with whatever company, how likely are you to recommend them to others. And this question can have variants to it, but this is generally what it looks like most of the time. You may not say friends, family, and/or colleagues. You may just recommend them to colleagues, depending on your company, or friends and family, depending on if you're a B2C company. So anyway, it's this question, and then we've got a scale of 0 to 10. So it starts with 0, and if you say 0, it means you're very unlikely to recommend the company to friends, family, others. And then we get all the way to 10. And if you say 10, that means you're very likely. And the way that this Net Promoter Score works is there's basically three groups of people based on your score. So if you say 0 to 6 on this 11-point scale, you're considered a detractor. If you said 9 or 10, you're considered a promoter, meaning you're very likely to recommend. 0 to 6 is considered very unlikely to recommend. And then somewhere in between are these 7s and 8s that are termed passives in this model. So the way it's just important to understand when we say how to get more promoters, we're talking about people who would say, hey, I'm very likely to recommend your company to others. So the question, how is this score calculated? And we'll get to that now. It's pretty easy. It's promoters, percentage minus detractors, and you get the Net Promoter Score. So if you had, let's say you had 50% promoters. Oh, here's an example. If you have 63% promoters, okay. All right, and 4% detractors, that means you would have 33%, is my math right? Passives in that case, right? If my math is right. Is that correct?
Right, that 63 and 4 doesn't add up to 100.
Right, so it's 33% would be passives. But the way that Net Promoter Score is calculated is it's subtracting your detractors. In this case, it's only 4% from your promoters, which in this case is 63%. So you would have a Net Promoter Score of 59. And that's why it's called Net Promoter, because it's a net of your promoters. Because what the theory is, your detractors are taking away from your promoters in a big way. So the net of all that is this score. So Net Promoter Score can range from minus 100. So you had everybody scoring 0 to 6, 100% of your people, which is a really bad thing. I don't think we've ever seen that, Audrey, right? 100%.
I have never seen that.
But in theory, you could have negative 100 on this score, or all the way up to positive 100. So if you had every single one of your customers saying you'd recommend you, you'd have 100, a plus 100. Most companies range in the 30-ish to 60-ish range, which is good. The best companies are in the 80s these days and more. We've even seen some 90s recently, which is incredible. We have seen certainly companies that are negative, meaning they have more detractors than promoters. This is typically, in the usual suspect industries that you can imagine, monopoly type industries where, the customer is not always focused on. So that's Net Promoter Score, that's promoters, those are detractors. And, you do have these passives that are not part of this calculation. So hopefully that's clear on what this all is.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview. And I think that's a perfect segue into the three tips that were the strategies that we're going to be going through today. Now that everybody's on the same page about what
Mhm.
detractors, passives, and promoters are, let's dive into how we can turn our customers into those promoters, those nines and tens.
Now, I'll start off by saying this, like the key, I think, to getting more promoters is that you have to get your mind away from the net promoter score. Because the net promoter score, the way it's calculated, we just described it, it's promoters minus detractors. If you just look at that score and you're obsessed with that score, you might just focus on these detractors. Okay, how do we get less of them? So our score goes up. But that's the number one way you won't get more promoters. The net promoter score itself is preventing you from getting more promoters. And why is that, Audrey? Because that's our number one recommendation.
Yeah, so our number one strategy is to actually focus on passives. It's that segment of people who are not included in the Net Promoter Score calculation. So passives are the people who gave you a 7 or an 8 on the Net Promoter Score question. And they're people who didn't have a terrible experience. They're not going to go around bad mouthing your company, but they also didn't have a stellar experience where they're so thrilled with something that happened that they're recommending you. And so you want to look at what's going on with them, especially those people who gave you an 8 on Net Promoter Score. They're 1 point away from being promoters. They're happy, but they're not thrilled. What's going on there? So if you can separate that group of people and really examine their feedback, read their comments, look at their answers to other questions on your survey, what's going on with this group? And how do the themes that they're talking about differ from those of promoters? And then come up with a strategy that says, I'm going to do certain things with this passive group so that they will turn into promoters. So I think that's the number one thing to do is really focus on passives, on that population of your respondents and figure out what's going on with them so you can turn them into promoters. They're primed and ready to be promoters, but you have to take some action to get them there.
Hi, it's Madeline. Thanks for joining us for People Metrics Live. If this is your first time watching, People Metrics Live is a weekly live webinar session where experts from our team answer your questions about customer, employee, and patient experience measurement and management. And sometimes we show you how you can achieve your goals using tools within our experience management platform. We've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and this is a great way for us to share our knowledge with you. You can sign up for upcoming sessions of People Metrics Live at www.peoplemetrics.com/events and bring a friend.
Definitely. And just some quick tips on how to do that. Like you can take your customer groups, right? You know whether they're a promoter or a passive, right? So you should be able to easily segment your data that way. And you can first of all look at what are they saying? Like, so if you have an open-ended question and you ask why, typically there's a question why after that net promoter score. Why do you feel that way? Or if there's an overall satisfaction with the most recent experience, you might ask why. Why was that? And if you start to read through the promoter comments and then the passive comments, you can start getting an idea of really good feeling for what one group is thinking about versus another. Now, if you have lots and lots of data and you can't read through these, then there are tools like People Metrics has a text analytics program that looks at all the open-ended comments and identifies themes and shows you a word cloud that's have we done a People Metrics Live on text analytics, Madeline? We did,
have,
right?
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, you can go on our YouTube channel if you want to see kind of the inner workings of our text analytics.
But the cool thing is it'll show you a word cloud, right, with words that a group is talking about. And you can put that side by side, the passives and the promoters, and see kind of what is bothering the passives that might not be bothering the promoters. So maybe it's if you have a service-oriented business, maybe it's wait time, or maybe it's something like, employee friendliness or recognizing the customer's name or whatever. You'll start seeing things that are differentiating those two groups. And that's kind of how you can get more promoters. You can start seeing what are you doing for promoters, or what are promoters perceiving they're getting that the passives aren't, and making sure that all your customers are receiving that same experience that the promoters are. Maybe it's not consistent enough. across all of your customers. And you can start seeing what do you have to do to get more of those passives into the promoter bucket. Because as Audrey said, they're so close. And that's why we recommend focusing on them rather than detractors, because detractors, frankly, are probably far away from being a promoter. They probably have to be kind of eased up into maybe the passive world before getting to promoters. But you're so close with the passives. And in the example we just showed, more than a third of that company that had the NPS score of 59, right, had, or was it a third? It was 33%, were passives. And that's a huge opportunity to move that versus like focusing on those 4% that were detractors and like looking for anything you can do to move them. That's much, much harder to get somebody from, say, a 3 to a 9 than getting somebody from an 8 to a 9. Right? And Audrey, look, you look at this stuff all the time, right? That there's just no doubt that that's right, something we see.
Yeah, I mean, detractors are important, but look at the size of those groups. You said it, 33% of your respondents versus just 4%. It's, you have so much more opportunity, and passives are often overlooked. And I think it's where you're going to see the most movement if you put your focus there.
And that's consistent across the board too. Like you're going to see higher levels of passives than detractors, hopefully. Like detractors are people typically who've had a really poor experience at some point recently, or multiple poor experiences. And it's, remember, this question is almost a cumulative relationship score. It's based on a lot of experience that they've had with you over the years. And it's just hard to turn that around and turn them into a raving fan of yours, because that's really what promoters are. They're raving fans. These are the people who are writing good reviews on websites. These are the people that are telling their colleagues and friends about the experiences they've had. These are people who are probably buying more from you and buying more often, right? So to get there from having really, really poor experiences is hard. To get there from maybe having one poor experience, having you follow up and make it right, then you could probably move them into a promoter category. But just in general, you're going to see a lot more passives than detractors, and those are your low-hanging fruit. Now, Audrey, I know we have people, our clients, right, that they're like, yeah, I could look at these two groups, or we could get you People Metrics to look at these two groups, and we can dig into the data and try to figure out the differences. But isn't there an easier way? And in fact, there is. And that's number 2, right?
Yeah. And it sounds so simple, but ask them. Just ask them. What would it take for us to make you a promoter? What would make you likely to recommend us? What can we do differently? And you can ask only passives if you want. You can put logic into your survey so that you're only showing this question to a particular group of people, but why not just ask them? And they'll tell you. Especially people who are in that middle range of NPS, who are passives, who had an okay experience, but they're not thrilled, they're not upset with you. Just ask them what they want, and a lot of times you're going to be able to do what it is. You're going to get lots of different answers, but you'll find themes, and you'll be able to aggregate those answers. And depending on your location or your industry, you might be able to make changes that will help push those passives into promoters.
That's such a great tip, because there's also, I'm thinking of, if you're comparing an 8 to a 9 response, there might be subtleties there that are hard to decipher if you don't have a tool like text analytics or a partner helping you. So that what a great way to just directly ask and find out that way.
Right, and you can start by asking, just like Audrey said, with an open-ended comment. So let them write whatever they want. Like, you could get me to be a promoter if you stopped having hold times that are 2 minutes, if you would answer my call within 30 seconds, or I could be a promoter if your checkout line was shorter, or you could be a promoter if you would have more products available for me to buy, or you would be more convenient, the appointments, or there could be anything they're typing in. But once you start reading these things, you're going to start to see groups of items kind of come together that promoters are saying time and time again. And then if you'd like, in addition to having an open-ended comment, you can have a check, we call it a multi-check box, where you could start putting themes that I just talked about on a question. So just for promoters, you could say, hey, we noticed your promoter is, or we noticed that you scored us 8 out of 10. What would it take? What would it take to increase that to a 9 or 10 out of 10? Please select all that apply. And it could be, these items that I just said, or there could be a none of the above. And if they check a none of the above, you could then ask them an open-ended question saying, hey, could you tell us what it would be? How could we do that? So there's ways that this program can evolve to make it even easier on you, so you don't have to continue to read through them. You can just get an idea of where are your gaps, or where are the holes in your offering and your experience over all of your customer base that are passives that are preventing you from getting them into promoters. And then you have to weigh the investment on increasing that versus the benefit of getting more promoters.
Did you know that you can watch past sessions of People Metrics Live right here on our YouTube channel? All you have to do is click the link above. Be sure to check them out for answers to dozens of questions, along with stories, tips, short tutorials, and best practices from our team of experts. You can click the bottom right corner of this video to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update. I'm thinking of that, again, what you guys were both saying about that number of passives that just aren't even showing up in the calculation of NPS, and how much easier it would be to push those 7s and 8s to 9s and 10s in larger chunks, I would imagine, than trying to just reduce your number of detractors by, 1% or 2. As it factors into that calculation. So I think that brings us to number 3, which I know is taking the focus away from the passives for a moment onto another group of responders.
Yes. So if you want to increase your number of promoters, don't lose any. Because it's really hard if you start getting your 9s starting to answer 8s, and then you're always playing catch up to try to, get more 7s and 8s to get to the 9s and 10s. So take care of your promoters, thank them for filling out the survey, give them, treat them differently, frankly. So customers should be treated differently. Your best customers should get more attention from you. Encourage them to promote you. So Audrey, we had this one story I can share that a client had these promoters, right? They kept coming in, had a very high net promoter score. They were trying to figure out what to do to have them appreciated. So they had their sales team, this is more of a B2B company. They had their sales team reach out every time there was a promoter who indicated they would recommend. A member of the sales team would call them and just thank them for filling out the survey, thank them for their business, and just gave them some sincere appreciation for taking the time to do that and their business. And, voila, the magic in that, half those conversations resulted in a referral being given by those promoters to that sales rep. It wasn't heavy-handed. It wasn't like, it wasn't even a question they asked. It just sort of came up in conversation. So that's kind of a double tip that, when you get these promoters, a lot of times companies just kind of have them sit there and they're a metric or they're a KPI to be delivered to executives, which is great. It should be. It's a really good way to manage the business. But there's a lot more you can do with them by literally segmenting them out, identifying who they are, making sure that they have some contact, depending on your business, either with a person or otherwise, to make sure they know how appreciated they are. Because they can make or break, and do often make or break your business.
I think companies are often focused on detractors because it feels like a problem area that needs to be addressed. But with these things that we just mentioned, focusing both on passives and promoters really pays off in the end. Passives are a great opportunity to turn them into promoters. And like you just mentioned, promoters, you need to keep them and they give referrals. So focusing on your happiest customers makes sense too. Something else I wanted to mention, Sean, you said, doing all this analysis and and we said asking this open-ended question makes sense, but we at People Metrics are always happy to help you do the analysis. We do it often, and we love getting into the data and finding themes and making recommendations. So we'll always help you do that, but sometimes you're able to do it yourself, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things that you can do is you can take promoters, passives, detractors. Those are 3 columns on a spreadsheet, and just put every single question that you have asked on your survey and see how they differ.
Yeah.
Because it's almost sometimes like you have 3 different customer groups with 3 different experiences. And, you know, every single question that's, you know, quantitative that you can get a percentage on. And you can start seeing like, geez, how do we get more people to have this kind of experience? And sometimes it may not even be the experience they're having. It just may be sometimes your customers aren't right for your company, right? That's possible too, that there's nothing you can do to please a certain group. So then, you know, you want to get more of what those promoters are. So that's another reason to really dig into, well, who are these promoters? What do they look like, right? How do they behave? How can we serve them better? How can we find more of them? So it can be a combination, both execution is certainly something that happens, but also targeting, like who are you going after? It often shows that you might have too many different customer segments you're going after, because you know that you may find like you have a certain one of them that are mostly promoters. There's just so much you can do analytically with Net Promoter Score. I just want to encourage people to do that, because you can really find gold in the data.
Yeah. And even if you are going to focus on detractors and try and turn them around, I think it makes sense to segment them. Well, and all of your respondents, to look at a distribution of your NPS. So people who gave you a 0 or 1 probably are feeling differently than people who gave you a 5 or 6 on those NPS answers. And just even doing that type of analysis will give you an idea of what you should be focusing on as well.
Yeah, and we've done a People Metrics Live on closing the loop, right? Usually when there's a very negative, most recent experience, it is reflected in the Net Promoter Score, and they may turn into being a detractor if they had a very poor recent experience. And we've talked about how to close the loop on those experiences. Now, when you close the loop, sometimes that can turn it around and they become a raving fan. Other times it might take a little while, and you know, you may move them to a passive for now, but that sure beats them being in much closer to bringing them to a promoter. So Net Promoter Score is very much a relationship measure. Just, I know I've said that before, but it's important to really realize that. It's like in Listen or Die, I talked about, you know, you have a bank account with every one of your customers, right? And each customer has a bank account for you. And they think about, okay, how many withdrawals has it made and how many deposits? And what you want a lot of deposits in your customers' accounts. So when there is inevitably a bad experience, you still have a positive balance in their account. And that's really what NPS is measuring in a lot of ways. Like, what is our bank account balance over the lifetime of the relationship? You know, and by securing those promoters and almost reminding them sometimes of what you do for them, that's another way to kind of secure them for the long term.
Our founder and CEO, Sean, wrote an amazing book about customer experience management called Listen or Die: 40 Lessons That Turn Customer Feedback into Gold. It's a deep dive into best practices for CX measurement and management strategy based off of Sean's years of experience in the space, and you can easily read it front to back on an airplane ride. Pick up your copy today. It's available now on Amazon. Taking a look at our questions, and I think that you answered both of them just in our conversation. So I wanted to quickly revisit, but one question was, what percent of your customers should be promoters? I think, Sean, you touched on that just when you were going through the scale of, you know, negative 100 to 100. If you want to give.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can get above 50, you're in very good company in terms of Net Promoter Score. So that would generally mean you would need, depending on how many detractors you would have, right? You would need at least, right, half your customers to be promoters, assuming the rest of them are passives, but that isn't usually the case. Let's just assume 10% are passives, or I'm sorry, are detractors. If 10% are detractors and you have a score of, you know, 50, that means you have at least 60% of your people, your customers, being promoters, 60 minus 10. right? So that would be a Net Promoter Score of 50. It's definitely something, right? Audrey, would you say that more best practice is having more than half your customers as promoters for sure?
Absolutely, yeah. But I did want to say, if you're just starting out, you really want to look for a positive score, meaning you just have more promoters than detractors. And if that's
Yeah.
where you need to start, then you know where you need to go. So, we get people starting at all levels. We've seen negative NPS, and we can help you turn it around. And people, once you know your NPS, then you know what you need to do, and you'll start understanding how you can turn your customers into promoters. So, first thing I think is to be positive, and then where you really want to be is up above 50. 60 is a really good NPS, and then like Sean mentioned in the beginning, we're seeing some really high scores. World-class companies have 80 plus at this point.
As does People Metrics, Frank, FYI.
Sure.
Yes,
We have
88.
above, yes, we do. We like that, but that is our job. So we hope we would have a high score there, but but yeah, you're seeing, 80 used to be the sort of the very high benchmarks. And like I said, we've seen coming through this year, those even above 90, which is really just an unbelievable score. So, folks are doing a much better job on this. The experience is getting better across the board. It may not seem like it if you're out in the world sometimes, but things are improving greatly, especially due to technology and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely something worth measuring. It's a worthy corporate goal to have more promoters year over year, and having a strategy to do so is, the best way to get there.
Fantastic. Audrey, do you have any final words before we close out today?
No, I think we covered it. I think these are some great tips to turn customers into promoters. And, for really industry focused or company focused, that's when we dig into your data and can make very specific recommendations to help you move your customers into promoter segment.
Yeah, the funny thing is when somebody starts with an NPS program, the first thing they want to do is get the NPS score, of course. I want my NPS score, definitely. So once you get that score and you share it with everybody, then you sit back and you say, how am I going to improve this thing?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to get more promoters? What does the data tell us? And that's when it gets, that's kind of our fun. We like that, right, to try to dig into it. But
right.
it's an enormous opportunity.
That's great.
It's different than just reporting the score, right, Madeline? It's getting the why are we here today and what can we do to improve it?
Right. And it's different, I would imagine, for every business, right? Because you're B2B, you're B2C, you're in different industries, you have different customers, different locations, all those things will change what those recommendations end up being. So it's not necessarily as easy as, I think we were talking in our prep call about this. It's not just like cut your wait time and everybody's going to love you, because that's not, I mean, generally people don't like to wait, but it's
and every company has a different brand promise and their expectations of their customers are different.
Yeah, it's really all about the expectations, which is so interesting when you think about it.
So there's a lot in there, but I think what we're all trying to say, it's your data is your data. Once you get your data, then you can start really looking through it and figuring out how to get more promoters over time. And that does correlate to financial outcomes. I mean, I kind of just passed through it, but promoters do promote you more. Promoters do tend to stay with you longer, more loyalty. Promoters tend to be more likely to expand to different product categories, and they tend to just buy more in general.
And they recommend you.
Yeah, exactly. Hence promoter. Yes.
Yeah. Promoters beget promoters.
And with the world being, there's so much you don't know what to believe. Like you're looking at Twitter feeds, you're looking at social media, there's a lot of manipulation going on. Still, a trusted recommendation is the most, still today, the best source of new leads for companies. When you can get your customer or your client to recommend you to someone else like them, it beats any kind of advertising dollar out there. And it always has. Positive word of mouth has always been the best form of advertising.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for sharing your time and expertise with us. I thought this was an awesome discussion and overview of 3 strategies for turning your customers into promoters. And I just love the focus on passives. I know, it's just something that I'm sure is overlooked in a lot of these programs just because it isn't part of the equation. So this was a great dive into different ways that you can leverage that. And just awesome. So thank you both. And I hope this has been a valuable conversation for everyone we've got on the line here. I'll make sure that when this goes up on our YouTube channel, we'll share a link to download the little diagrams that we were sharing earlier about how to calculate NPS and your detractors, passives and promoters, how that all works. And on behalf of everyone here at People Metrics, thank you for joining us for People Metrics Live. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe right here so you never miss an update. And have you checked out other sessions of People Metrics Live yet? You can click right here to watch them all. I'll see you there.